Stop everything you're doing right now because I'm about to show you footage and break down a moment that WWE tried to hide from you, a moment so brutal and so shocking that they didn't even air it on live television, a moment that changes everything we thought we knew about the Seth Rollins and Bronson Reed rivalry. Last night on Smackdown, while you were watching whatever segment they fed you on your TV screen, something absolutely insane was happening backstage that only a handful of people witnessed in person, and the fact that WWE chose not to broadcast it live tells you everything you need to know about how dangerous and how uncontrolled this situation has become. Seth Rollins, who has been out of action for months, who we all thought was still recovering at home from the devastating injuries that Bronson Reed inflicted on him, secretly returned to the arena last night and launched the most vicious, most personal, most unhinged ambush attack I have ever seen in my years of covering professional wrestling. And I'm not talking about a worked shoot or a carefully choreographed backstage brawl. I'm talking about Seth Rollins hunting Bronson Reed through the backstage area like a man possessed, like someone who has lost every shred of sanity and control, and delivering the kind of revenge that makes you question whether this is even still professional wrestling or if we've crossed into something much darker and much more real. Bronson Reed is in the hospital right now. Seth Rollins has been escorted out of the building by security and possibly arrested. And WWE has a massive problem on their hands because this rivalry just went from being a storyline to being a legitimate situation that could have legal consequences, insurance implications, and repercussions that extend far beyond what happens in the ring. So buckle up, hit that like button right now, smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications because you're not going to want to miss a single second of this breakdown, and trust me when I tell you that by the end of this video you're going to be just as shocked and just as angry as I am about what went down and what it means for the future of WWE. Before I show you the leaked footage that's been circulating on social media and break down every single detail of what happened, we need to establish the context of this rivalry because if you don't understand the history between Seth Rollins and Bronson Reed, if you don't know about the months of escalation and the brutality that's been building, then you won't fully appreciate just how catastrophic last night's events were. This all started several months ago when Bronson Reed was moved to the main roster and immediately made it clear that he wasn't interested in slowly working his way up the card or paying his dues or waiting for opportunities to be handed to him. He wanted to make an immediate impact, and the way he chose to do that was by targeting one of the biggest names on the roster, one of the most accomplished and respected performers in WWE history. He targeted Seth Rollins. And it wasn't just a simple rivalry where they had some back and forth promos and then scheduled a match. No, Bronson Reed went out of his way to absolutely destroy Seth Rollins in the most brutal ways possible. The first attack happened after a random episode of Smackdown where Seth had just finished a match. He was walking up the ramp, celebrating with the fans, completely unaware of what was about to happen. And then Bronson Reed's music hit. The confusion on Seth's face was genuine because there was no reason for Reed to be out there, no storyline connection between them at that point. Reed walked down that ramp with purpose, with bad intentions written all over his face, and before Seth could even react or defend himself, Reed was on him like a savage animal. The beating that followed was uncomfortable to watch. Reed threw Seth around like he weighed nothing, slammed him on the steel ramp multiple times, and then delivered not one, not two, but 5 consecutive tsunami splashes, driving all 290 pounds of his body weight onto Seth's chest and ribs over and over again. The medics rushed out. The cameras cut away. And we later learned that Seth Rollins had suffered broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and severe internal bruising that put him on the shelf indefinitely. That should have been enough. That should have been the catalyst for a rivalry where they build to a big match and settle their differences in the ring like professionals. But Bronson Reed wasn't satisfied with just injuring Seth once. He continued to attack him during his recovery. When Seth was doing interviews about his return timeline, Reed showed up and attacked him again. When Seth was at a WWE event doing promotional work, Reed blindsided him and put him through a table. It became obsessive. It became personal. And with each attack, Reed's reasoning became clearer. He saw Seth Rollins as the embodiment of everything that's held him back in his career. He saw Seth as someone who gets opportunities handed to him because of his name and his history rather than earning them. He saw Seth as a gatekeeper who needs to be eliminated in order for new stars like Reed to truly break through to the main event level. And he was determined to not just beat Seth Rollins, not just defeat him in a match, but to end his career entirely, to injure him so severely that he could never come back. Seth, for his part, tried to take the high road initially. He cut promos about how Reed was making a mistake, about how attacking him wasn't going to lead to the success and recognition that Reed thought it would, about how violence for the sake of violence never ends well for anyone. But as the attacks continued, as the injuries piled up, as Seth spent more and more time on the shelf instead of doing what he loves, something changed in him. The fire in his eyes during his interview segments became more intense. The threats became more specific and more violent. He started talking less about beating Bronson Reed in a match and more about making him pay, about hurting him the way he'd been hurt, about revenge that goes beyond the normal boundaries of professional wrestling. And those of us who have watched Seth's entire career, who remember his days in the Shield when he was willing to do absolutely anything to achieve his goals, who remember the ruthless version of Seth Rollins that existed before he became the more heroic character he's been in recent years, we recognize that look. We knew that when Seth finally came back, it wasn't going to be for a handshake and a fair fight. It was going to be for war. But nobody expected him back this soon. The official reports from WWE were that Seth was still weeks away from being cleared to return. He hadn't been at any recent shows. He hadn't been doing any promotional appearances. As far as anyone knew, he was still at home, still recovering, still working with doctors and physical therapists to get back to full health. Bronson Reed certainly thought Seth was still out of action, which is why he's been walking around Smackdown with impunity, acting like he's untouchable, cutting promos about how he ended Seth Rollins' career and nobody can stop him from taking over the entire brand. Reed was in the middle of his most arrogant and obnoxious phase, completely convinced that he'd won this rivalry before it ever really had a chance to begin. And that false sense of security, that belief that Seth was still far away from returning, is exactly what Seth was counting on. According to multiple sources who were backstage at Smackdown last night, Seth Rollins arrived at the arena hours before the show started, but he didn't come through the normal entrance. He didn't check in with production. He didn't go to his usual locker room. He snuck into the building through a side entrance that's typically used by arena staff and production crew, wearing regular clothes and a baseball cap pulled low over his face so nobody would recognize him. He found an empty equipment room in a rarely used section of the backstage area and set up camp there, waiting with the patience of a predator who knows his prey will eventually cross his path. He had done his research. He knew Bronson Reed's routine on show days. He knew what time Reed typically arrived at the arena. He knew which entrance Reed preferred to use. He knew the path Reed usually took from his car to his locker room, and he positioned himself accordingly, hiding in the shadows, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Bronson Reed arrived at the arena around 5 p.m., which is typical for most wrestlers on show days. He parked his car, grabbed his bag, and started walking through the backstage corridors toward the locker room area, completely oblivious to the danger that was lurking nearby. He was on his phone, probably scrolling through social media or responding to messages, not paying attention to his surroundings because why would he? He had no reason to think Seth Rollins was anywhere near the building, and that's when Seth made his move. Witnesses say it happened so fast that Reed didn't even have time to react. 1 second he was walking normally, and the next second Seth Rollins came out of nowhere like a missile, tackling Reed with such force that both men crashed into a stack of equipment cases, sending cables and gear flying in every direction. But Seth didn't stop with just the tackle. He immediately started raining down punches on Reed's face, closed-fist strikes that you never see in normal WWE programming, strikes that were clearly designed to hurt rather than to look good for cameras. Reed tried to cover up, tried to defend himself, but Seth was relentless, possessed by months of pent-up rage and frustration and pain. He grabbed Reed by the hair and slammed his head into the concrete floor once, twice, 3 times, and you could hear the sickening thud of skull-meeting concrete echoing through the hallway. Other wrestlers started coming out of their locker rooms because of the commotion, but nobody intervened immediately because when you see Seth Rollins in that state, when you see someone who has completely lost control and is operating on pure instinct and anger, you don't just jump in unless you want to become part of the violence yourself. Seth dragged Reed to his feet, or at least tried to, because Reed's legs were already shaky from the head strikes. And then Seth did something that nobody expected. He grabbed a nearby steel chair, the kind of chair that's used for backstage interview segments, and he absolutely destroyed Bronson Reed with it. Not the usual wrestling chair shots where you aim for the back or the shoulders and the sound is worse than the actual impact. Seth swung the chair like he was trying to hit a home run, connecting with Reed's ribs with a crack that made everyone watching wince. Reed doubled over in pain and Seth hit him again, this time across the back, and then again, and again, and again. Witnesses say he hit Reed with that chair at least 15 times before the chair was so bent and mangled that it couldn't be used anymore, at which point Seth just threw it aside and grabbed something else. The catering area was nearby, and Seth dragged Reed toward it, leaving a trail of chaos and destruction in their wake. Tables were overturned. Equipment was knocked over. Other wrestlers and staff members were scrambling to get out of the way because this wasn't a worked angle, this was a real fight between 2 men who genuinely wanted to hurt each other. Seth slammed Reed face first into the catering table, and food and drinks went everywhere. He grabbed Reed's head and smashed it into one of the big metal serving trays, denting the tray and opening up a cut above Reed's eye that immediately started gushing blood. And the whole time, Seth was screaming at Reed, saying things that were probably too explicit and too personal to repeat verbatim, but the general message was clear. This is what you get for what you did to me. This is payback for every attack, every injury, every week I spent on the shelf because of you. You wanted to end my career, so now I'm going to end yours. By this point, security had been called and multiple officials were trying to pull Seth away from Reed, but Seth fought them off too. He shoved one security guard so hard that the guy fell backwards into a wall. He threw an elbow that caught another official right in the jaw. It took at least 6 people to finally get Seth under control and drag him away from Bronson Reed, and even then he was still fighting, still trying to get back to Reed to continue the assault. Reed, meanwhile, was in bad shape. He was bleeding heavily from the cut above his eye. He was holding his ribs and struggling to breathe. He was barely conscious from all the head strikes. The medical team rushed over immediately and started checking him out, and the decision was made within minutes to call an ambulance and transport him to the hospital for evaluation because the injuries he sustained weren't the kind of thing you can just slap a band-aid on and send someone back to work. Here's where things get really interesting and really complicated from a business and legal standpoint. WWE made the decision not to air any of this on live television. The show went on as planned with whatever segments were already scheduled, and there was no mention whatsoever of Seth Rollins being in the building or of Bronson Reed being attacked. To the television audience, it was just another normal episode of Smackdown. But to the people who were actually in the arena, to the wrestlers and staff who witnessed what happened or heard about it immediately after, this was the only thing anyone could talk about. And the reason WWE didn't air it, according to insider reports, is because they're genuinely concerned about the liability issues surrounding what Seth did. If this gets classified as a real assault rather than a storyline attack, if Bronson Reed decides he wants to press charges, or if there are insurance complications because this happened outside the normal parameters of a scheduled match or angle, WWE could be looking at serious legal problems. There's also the question of whether Seth was even supposed to be at the building. Some reports suggest that WWE officials had no idea he was going to be there, that this was Seth acting completely on his own without approval from management or creative, which would make this an unauthorized attack that WWE has to figure out how to handle both from a storyline perspective and from an employee conduct perspective. Other reports claim that certain high-level people within WWE knew Seth was planning this and gave him tacit approval, understanding that sometimes you need to let wrestlers settle their issues in a way that feels real and organic rather than scripted and sanitized. But if that's true, if WWE officials knew this was going to happen and allowed it anyway, that opens up an entirely different set of legal and ethical questions about workplace safety and duty of care. The footage I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the leaked clips that have been making the rounds on social media, allegedly came from someone who was filming on their phone when the attack started. The quality isn't great because it was shot from a distance and the person filming was clearly trying to stay out of the way of the chaos, but you can see enough to understand the severity of what happened. You can see Seth's initial tackle. You can see some of the chair shots. You can see the moment when Reed was slammed face-first into the catering table. And what's most striking about the footage is how real it looks compared to normal wrestling violence. There's no theatrical selling. There's no camera angle cutting away at the perfect moment. It's just raw, brutal, uncomfortable violence that makes you feel like you're watching something you shouldn't be watching. WWE has been trying to get that footage taken down from social media platforms, issuing copyright claims and DMCA takedowns, but as we all know, once something is out there on the internet, it's impossible to completely eliminate it. The footage keeps getting re-uploaded by different accounts. It's being shared in private messages and group chats. Wrestling news sites are writing about it and including screenshots. And all of this is creating a situation where WWE either has to address what happened directly and incorporate it into their storyline, or they have to continue pretending it didn't happen and risk looking foolish when everyone knows it did. From a storytelling perspective, this attack is both the best and worst thing that could happen to the Seth Rollins and Bronson Reed rivalry. It's the best because it adds a level of intensity and realism that you rarely see in modern wrestling. The idea that Seth was so consumed by his desire for revenge that he couldn't wait for an official return, that he had to sneak into the building and attack Reed without permission or planning, makes him feel like a real person with real emotions rather than just a character following a script. It makes the rivalry feel personal and dangerous in a way that most storylines don't. And the fact that Reed is now in the hospital with legitimate injuries, assuming WWE plays it that way in the storyline, creates all kinds of possibilities for how this continues. Will Reed be out for weeks or months, giving Seth time to cut promos about what he did and why he did it? Will Reed return even more angry and more violent than before, escalating this to an even more brutal level? Will there be some kind of no disqualification or unsanctioned match where they're allowed to legally try to kill each other without WWE being liable? But it's also the worst because WWE now has to figure out how to walk the line between treating this as a storyline and acknowledging the real-world implications of what happened. If they go too far in making it seem like a legitimate assault, they risk bringing unwanted attention from media outlets and legal authorities who might start asking uncomfortable questions about workplace safety in WWE. If they completely sanitize it and turn it into just another worked angle where everyone's fine the next week, they risk disappointing fans who saw the leaked footage and know that what happened was more serious than a typical backstage brawl segment. And there's the additional complication of Seth's status within the company. If this was an unauthorized attack, does WWE have to punish him in some way to maintain order and discipline in the locker room? Do they fine him or suspend him, even though that would derail the hottest rivalry they have right now? Or do they overlook it because the attack generates so much buzz and interest that it's worth the headache? The reactions from other wrestlers on social media have been fascinating to watch. Some people are posting things that seem to support Seth and suggest that Reed had it coming after months of attacking Seth during his injury recovery. Others are posting more neutral statements about hoping Reed is okay and that this situation gets resolved professionally. And a few people have posted things that seem critical of Seth, suggesting that there's a right way and a wrong way to handle business and that ambushing someone without warning crosses a line. But what's most interesting is how many active WWE wrestlers have stayed completely silent about it, not posting anything at all, which suggests they either don't know what the official company line is supposed to be or they're uncomfortable with the whole situation and don't want to wade into it publicly. The fans, predictably, are divided in their reactions. One segment of the fanbase is absolutely loving this because it feels different and dangerous and unpredictable compared to the usual carefully scripted wrestling programming they're used to watching. They're praising Seth for taking matters into his own hands and creating a moment that feels real. They're arguing that this is what wrestling should be, that it should make you uncomfortable sometimes, that it should blur the lines between reality and fiction. Another segment is concerned about the safety issues and the precedent this sets. They're worried that if WWE allows or encourages this kind of unsanctioned violence, it could lead to situations where people get seriously hurt. They're pointing out that there's a reason wrestling matches have rules and regulations, that it's not just about telling a good story but also about protecting the performers from unnecessary injury. And then there's the segment that thinks the whole thing is a work, that WWE leaked the footage intentionally and that everything including Reed going to the hospital is part of an elaborate storyline designed to generate buzz. Personally, I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I believe the attack happened and that it was more intense than a typical backstage segment, but I also think WWE had some level of knowledge about it and has a plan for how to incorporate it into the storyline going forward. What I don't think they anticipated was how much attention the leaked footage would get and how difficult it would be to control the narrative once that footage started spreading. WWE is used to having complete control over what their audience sees and how they see it, and this situation is a reminder that in the age of smartphones and social media, that level of control is increasingly impossible to maintain. Looking ahead, there are so many questions about where this goes next. When does Seth Rollins officially return to television, and how does WWE explain his actions? Do they have him come out and cut a remorseless promo about how Reed deserved everything he got? Do they have him show some regret or concern about how far he went? Do they position him as a babyface who the audience should sympathize with because he was driven to this by months of attacks? Or do they position him as someone who crossed a line and needs to be held accountable? And what about Bronson Reed? How long will he be out of action, and will this make him even more of a sympathetic figure despite being the one who started this whole rivalry with his unprovoked attacks on Seth months ago? Could we see a situation where the audience actually starts feeling bad for Reed because what Seth did went too far? There's also the broader question of what this means for the culture and direction of WWE programming. Are we going to see more of these kinds of intense, realistic, uncomfortable moments where the line between reality and storyline is deliberately blurred? Is this a sign that WWE is willing to take more risks and push boundaries in ways they haven't in recent years? Or is this a one-off situation that got out of hand and that WWE will make sure never happens again? The answer to that question will tell us a lot about where the company is headed creatively and what kind of product they want to present to their audience. What really bothers me about this entire situation, what keeps me up at night thinking about it, is the safety aspect. I love professional wrestling. I've dedicated my life to covering it and analyzing it and helping people appreciate the art form. But I also recognize that it's an inherently dangerous business where people put their bodies on the line every single night. The reason we have referees and rules and medical staff on standby is because even in a worked environment where the outcomes are predetermined, things can go wrong and people can get hurt. When you remove those safeguards, when you have situations like what happened with Seth and Reed where it's essentially an uncontrolled fight in a backstage area with concrete floors and metal equipment everywhere, the risk of serious injury increases exponentially. What if Seth had hit Reed with one of those chair shots at the wrong angle and caused permanent damage? What if Reed had fallen wrong when he was tackled and broken his neck? These might sound like extreme scenarios, but they're not outside the realm of possibility when you're talking about two large men fighting with real intensity in an uncontrolled environment. I want wrestling to feel real. I want storylines that make me feel genuine emotions and invest in the characters. But I also want everyone involved to go home safely at the end of the night and be able to have long, healthy careers. And I worry that the more we push for these ultra-realistic moments that blur the lines between work and shoot, the more we're putting performers in positions where they feel pressure to do dangerous things to get a reaction or to be seen as tough or committed. There has to be a balance between creating compelling content and maintaining a safe working environment, and I'm not sure WWE has figured out where that balance point is yet. The conspiracy theorist in me wonders if this entire situation is actually a brilliant marketing ploy. Think about it. WWE is constantly competing for attention in an oversaturated media landscape where people have endless entertainment options. Traditional wrestling angles, even well-executed ones, often struggle to break through the noise and become mainstream talking points. But a leaked footage of a brutal backstage fight that WWE allegedly didn't want you to see? That's catnip for wrestling fans and casual observers alike. That gets shared on social media. That gets written about by news outlets. That gets people talking and debating and tuning in to see what happens next. If WWE planned this from the beginning, if they deliberately leaked the footage and manufactured the controversy about whether it was real or not, then it's actually genius from a promotional standpoint. But if that's the case, if this is all a carefully orchestrated work designed to look like a shoot, then they're playing a dangerous game because eventually fans will get wise to it, and the next time they try something like this, people won't believe it's real and the impact will be diminished. The truth is, we probably won't know the full story of what happened last night for weeks or months, maybe not until someone involved does a shoot interview years from now and reveals the behind-the-scenes details. WWE is notoriously secretive about what's real and what's storyline, and they have a vested interest in keeping fans guessing because the uncertainty is part of what keeps people engaged. All we can do is watch how this plays out on television, pay attention to the clues and hints that WWE drops through their programming, and try to piece together the truth from the carefully curated narrative they present to us. What I can tell you with certainty is that Seth Rollins vs. Bronson just became the hottest rivalry in WWE, possibly in all of wrestling. The attack last night, whether it was completely real or partially worked or somewhere in between, succeeded in making people care about these two and their story in a way that traditional booking might not have accomplished. People are going to tune into Smackdown next week to see if Seth appears and what he has to say. People are going to be watching for updates on Reed's condition and when he might return. People are going to be analyzing every detail and looking for clues about what really happened and what it means. And that level of engagement and investment is exactly what WWE wants, even if the path to getting there was messy and controversial and raised some uncomfortable questions about how far is too far. I need to know what you think about all of this because I'm genuinely conflicted about how to feel. Part of me is excited by the intensity and unpredictability of what happened. Part of me is concerned about the safety implications and the precedent it sets. Part of me thinks this could be the beginning of something really special if WWE handles it correctly. And part of me worries they're going to fumble it and waste all the momentum they just created. Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Do you think the attack was real or worked? Do you support what Seth did or do you think he crossed a line? How do you think WWE should handle this going forward? Do you want to see more of these realistic, intense moments or do you prefer traditional wrestling storytelling? I want to hear every opinion, every theory, every take, because this is the kind of moment that defines eras and creates discussions that last for years. Hit that like button if this video gave you new information or a perspective you hadn't considered. Subscribe to the channel because I'm going to be covering every development in this story as it unfolds, and you're not going to want to miss a single update. Share this video with every wrestling fan you know because they need to hear about what happened if they haven't already, and we need to have a broader conversation as a community about what we want from wrestling and where the line should be between entertainment and reality. The Seth Rollins and Bronson Reed situation is just getting started, and based on everything that happened last night, things are about to get even more intense, even more controversial, and even more unmissable. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where hopefully we'll have more answers about this insane situation.